Thank you, Megan. Still got people trickling in. We're going to give folks a few minutes to get into this meeting space because we had 8 o'clock meetings starting this morning, and I don't know if anybody from my team can add a comment about what the attendance levels look like. Yesterday we had really strong attendance at the 8 o'clock sessions. We were a little surprised. And I'm not sure, Megan, do you see what's going on with the screen?
Yep, I just wanted to take a moment to close my email.
Thank you. So Paul said there's about 40 people in the monitoring stream. And we're going to watch that number go up and fluctuate a little bit, but thank you everybody for coming in. Nice, thanks Jen McNally. 76 people were in the People and Policy session with Mike Engelson and Karen Reynolds talking about web pages and online communication, something that's going to be dramatically needed, I think, in the next couple of months. The ability of lake organizations and citizens to communicate using distance communications is going to be super important. All right, a lot of the facilitators from the morning sessions are checking in now, so we're feeling pretty confident we got a lot of those people coming into the room. I'll introduce myself again. I'm Eric Olson. Some of this, if you were in our plenary yesterday, which probably most of you were, this might be repeated, but we are also changing it up a little bit to reflect the fact that there's some people who just are coming Friday. So we got maybe a different set of audiences today, and we want to cover some of the groundwork. So apologies for some of this being redundant. I'm going to try and keep my act together a bit better today. Can we go to the next slide, Megan? So again, I want to just give credit and thanks to UW Extension. They've been incredibly supportive of this. On the left-hand side, you see a list of people. They all have a range of responsibilities across the state of Wisconsin. Some of them are statewide specialists. Some of them are county educators. Some of them are regional natural resource educators. This has been the team that actually dove into the Zoom platform, got their capabilities up and running, and were able to set up the Zoom meetings that we're using for the concurrent sessions. So they by no means had to do this. They did it as a favor to us, so I thank them for doing that. Megan Wecker, who's part of our call today, she's a sort of a Zoom czar within Extension. Her and Tony Roman and Greg Joel are also part of the sort of backstage running these platforms role for us. So I want to give credit to them and thank them. Woo.
Thanks, Eric.
And then every year we go into a planning process. This starts typically in June or July, where we review sort of how the last year's convention went. We go over the comments that you all share in the feedback forms that we submit to you. You'll be able to see, actually, I think on the Friday agenda already online, there's a link to an evaluation tool. We'd love to get your feedback. This is obviously different for us and different for you, so it's going to be an anomaly this year, but we still want to hear your thoughts about how this meeting went, how the topics, if the topics got you what you needed to hear, or if there's certain things that next time around you want to hear about, be sure to let us know. But I can't thank this team enough for the time that they put in. Some of them are doing this as volunteers. Some of them carve time out of their work schedule to join us. There's a lot of DNR staff in this list. There's a lot of county staff in this list. And then there's a few citizen volunteers who also just step up and help out with the planning, and we sincerely appreciate that. It wouldn't be the same meeting without them. And again, we want to recognize that when we're in Wisconsin, we're in the upper Midwest, we're not really in Wisconsin necessarily, just that. We're actually on top of land that is part of the ceded territory and part of cultural lands that were important to tribal communities that have existed in Wisconsin for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, as well as the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, is trying to make a concerted effort to recognize the fact that we coexist with these tribes, they coexist with us. We are trying to foster better communications and relations with tribes around lake issues and water issues all the time. It is something we need to do and something we actually want to do. Paul Goggin on the Extension Lake staff has actually spent quite a bit of time within the Division of Extension as well as with the Department of Natural Resources to try to foster trainings that help non-Indigenous people understand some of the cultural dimensions of what goes on in the tribal communities and how they view resources differently. It's important to understand their worldviews and to try to bring those together. We actually had some talks, I can't remember if it was today or yesterday, but there's a tribal adaptation menu for climate change that's out there. And that was actually supported by the United States Geological Survey. So check that out in the agenda. It'll be in the archives as well, or you can go ahead and search for the tribal adaptation menu and you'll find some great stuff. But we recognize these tribes and we value their input. Next slide. So again, we're recording all the presentation sessions, including this one. The convention archive is being built sort of as we speak. We're gathering up or wrangling these videos that get recorded out of the Zoom sessions. We're translating them into YouTube videos and posting them on the agenda so that after the fact you can go back. We always hear at the regular convention we have 6 concurrent streams happening at the same time. People are like, well, I want to go to 2 of these, but there's only 1 of me. Our answer to them usually is, well, bring another person so you can split up and tackle both those sessions. But this year is going to be unique. We'll actually have the ability to, people can go back and check out sessions they might have missed because they had to choose between different streams. You'd use the chat feature in those sessions to ask your questions. Hopefully you all got a chance to test that out and to use chat to ask questions. Sort of that answers the question, what's the value of doing a live meeting? It's because you get to ask your questions, and we always say that that's kind of why we put the live convention together too in person. But the second best thing is to have experts in the room, subject matter experts who can not only understand your question, but give you a fairly decent response, hopefully. We're going to use a feature like that today in the plenary. This is the Q&A feature. It's down there on your menu bar. It's not the same as chat, but Q&A is nice because you get to compose a question, and then other people in the room get to see the question that you've asked. And if they think it's a question worth asking, then they give it a thumbs up. And what that does is kind of gives a popularity voting to the questions themselves, so that the most popular questions will rise to the top, and we'll try to make a priority of answering those. In the Q&A, if you also have like a technical question or you come across a term that you don't quite understand, we have facilitators who can actually just type in responses to those types of questions and get you up to speed as quickly as possible. So it has 2 features there, upvoting questions, as well as asking clarification questions the facilitators can help out with. Again, we've been planning this convention for a long time, and we knew actually this is the first convention where we really wanted to put the word river in the title. Historically, this has just been either the Wisconsin Lakes Convention or the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership Convention. And if you've been paying attention, we've been integrating the Water Action Volunteers, which is the citizen science program for streams and rivers, more and more into our program. That program kind of wanted to make sure that they had an annual check-in with their volunteers. They want to do their own annual award ceremony every year to recognize great individuals who are volunteering to do water quality monitoring and tracking water resources for invasive species and things like that. And so over time, we've been saying, you know, this is becoming a Lakes and Rivers event, isn't it? We're gonna sort of interweave these topics. We're not just gonna have a Lakes Convention over here and a Rivers Convention over there. Let's just call it the Lakes and Rivers Convention. So this plenary was designed with that in mind, to try to highlight and play up the river connection. And it made sense a long time ago to say, you know what, we should connect with Representative Ron Kine's office, because he could come to Stevens Point, to the Holiday Inn, and he could actually welcome people to his district. This is the 3rd congressional district. And he could talk about some of the work that he's done. A lot of his offices, I think, are based out of La Crosse, and he does a lot of work on the Mississippi River Basin. So he could talk about the Mississippi, the basin itself, the interstate work, the federal work that has been happening and potentially will happen even more in the future. But not only can he talk about the Mississippi, he could talk about, if you look at this map, you'll notice it kind of shows the lower Wisconsin River working its way up to Stevens Point. And where I'm sitting right now in my office, I can look out the window and literally see the Wisconsin River flowing down towards its confluence with the Mississippi. It's running about 35,000 cubic feet per second. It's taking all the snowmelt from northern Wisconsin and zipping it past our backyard. Well, you know, I'm sure Ron would have liked to be here in person, but things have been pretty busy, I think, at the federal level. There's a lot of unprecedented work that they have to do to try to contend with changes that nobody really anticipated. However, his office was generous enough and kind enough to carve out time of his schedule for him to give us a welcome greeting. So I'd ask Megan to tee it up, and we'll hear from Representative Kind.
Good morning. I'm Congressman Ron Kind, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Convention. And I love the theme for this year's meeting, Resilient Lakes and Rivers. This may be the new normal. I wish we could all be gathering in person, but in light of the coronavirus, we have to practice our social distancing. But I'm glad you're continuing the work that you set out. Obviously, we've got a pandemic at our doorstep now, one of the great challenges that the globe is facing, but I've always believed for a long time that one of the other great challenges that we had in the 21st century was maintaining quality water supply for all of our citizens, both at home here in the United States and across the globe. That's why I've been such a forceful advocate of making sure we have the strongest possible conservation title coming out of the Farm Bill, which are voluntary and incentive-based land and water conservation programs, a huge public investment in private land ownership to reduce sediment and nutrient flows that would otherwise leave the land and into our lakes and rivers and wetlands and streams, doing the ecological damage. We're still fighting hard to make sure those programs work, and how do we adapt them to the current challenge of climate change today. But also, as the congressman with the most miles along the Mississippi River, I feel a special responsibility to bring focus and leadership on all issues affecting the Mississippi watershed area, which is everything between the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains. I helped form the bipartisan Mississippi River Caucus. It's a way for us to join forces of other representatives impacted by this large area to make sure that the watershed area has a seat at the table in policy making. And of course, coming from a state that's contiguous with the Great Lakes region, I'm very involved in the Great Lakes Initiative, as many of you are as well. But the only way this is going to work is from the bottom up. It's citizen involvement, which is exactly what you guys are all about. Making sure that we're working at the community level to enhance quality water supply, but also communicating with our representatives at the local, state, and federal level to help guide us on common sense policies that we all need to be pursuing together. So I look forward to continuing to partner with you in the days that come. I look forward to getting a grip on this coronavirus so that we can get this economy back on its feet, keeping people safe and healthy. But in the meantime, all of our work continues. So I wish you the happiest of convention times. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Good morning.
All right. That was great. I'm so glad that his office was able to find time to recognize what we're doing. It's not often that we actually get a huge federal presence at this event, but if you were with us yesterday, we did have a federal official with the USGS also sharing in the keynote. So it's great to sort of represent what can happen at a very large scale. And then if you were with us yesterday, you noticed that, and Congressman Kind mentioned this as well, we're focusing on resilience. And the logo this year, if people were paying attention to the plenary yesterday, is a bit of an embodiment of one of the concepts of resilience theory, the idea that there's cycles of building and growth, and then there's cycles of sort of decline and reorganization. But then after decline and reorganization, and in the winter, there's also a time of kind of things coming back together again and then going into another cycle of growth. People who study resiliency notice that this cycle, this sort of infinite loop, just seems to go on in nature. And what we're trying to do is learn from the science of resiliency to apply it into our practices. Yesterday, we showed a longer video. It's posted, I think, already in the archive for yesterday, that took these 7 principles of resilience and brought them into sort of the Wisconsin context and gave, I think, a pretty good explanation of what resilience is about. That video was actually derived from a content that the Stockholm Resilience Center put together. They did one of these animated videos that we want to share with you. It's much shorter than what we used yesterday, but it captures some of the same points. So without delay, we'll cut into this brief video, and then I'll come back to introduce our speakers.
In our globalized society, there are virtually no ecosystems that are not shaped by people, and no people without the need for ecosystem services. A resilience thinking approach investigates how the interaction between people and nature can best be managed. Here are 7 principles to help you apply this approach. Principle 1. Maintain diversity and redundancy. Systems with many different components, be they species, actors, or sources of knowledge, are generally more resilient than systems with few components. Diversity allows some components to compensate for the loss or failure of others. Principle 2. Manage connectivity. Connectivity can be both a good and a bad thing. Well-connected systems can recover from disturbances more quickly, but overly connected systems may lead to a rapid spread of disturbances. Principle 3. Manage slow variables and feedbacks. Managing slow variables and feedbacks is often crucial to make sure ecosystems produce essential services. If a slow variable, such as the phosphorus concentration in lake water, increases too much, the lake water can rapidly become eutrophied, after which it is very costly and difficult to return to a non-eutrophied state. Feedbacks can either reinforce or dampen change. An example of a positive feedback loop are grass fires, which promote further growth of the grasses and curb the growth of native shrub species. An example of a dampening feedback is sanctioning or punishment that occurs when someone breaks a rule. Principle 4. Foster complex adaptive systems thinking. Complex adaptive systems thinking means accepting that within a social ecological system, several connections are occurring at the same time on different levels. It also means accepting unpredictability and uncertainty and acknowledging a multitude of perspectives. Principle 5. Encourage learning. Social ecological systems are always in development, so there is a constant need to revise existing knowledge and stimulate learning. More collaborative processes can also help. Principle 6. Broaden participation. There are a range of advantages to broad and well-functioning participation. An informed and well-functioning group has the potential to build trust and a shared understanding, both fundamental ingredients for collective action. Principle 7. Promote polycentric governance. Polycentricity, a governance system in which multiple governing bodies interact, can help support collective action in times of change. But it is also vulnerable to tensions between actors and institutions. Involving a wide range of stakeholders means striking a balance between openness and mandates for decision-making.
So again, we are trying to build off of the research that people have done around resilience, and we're trying to integrate these 7 principles into our practices, not so much just to focus on, I think, maybe a more simplistic concept of sustainability or sustainable water resource management, but also truly resilient water resource management that can handle disturbances and fluctuations that might be surprises sometimes, but also might be expected in natural resources. Those videos, again, will be posted onto our archive. They're YouTube videos. We encourage you to share them with other people to get the ball rolling. But also, the Stockholm Resilience Center has published an entire book that sort of summarizes why those 7 principles were the ones that they've identified, what case studies did those come out of, and the book also then talks about how you could take the principles and put them into action. So we're thankful that there are people out there thinking at that scale. And as was mentioned yesterday, Wisconsin has had a role to play through the Center for Limnology and Steve Carpenter's work in informing resilience theory really worldwide. So as I mentioned earlier, we did want this to be a river-focused plenary today, and I'm very happy to have some people with me who are gonna make this a reality. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I do want to mention that we're going to have a couple of panelists who are joining her afterward, and this is similar to what we did yesterday. They'll be able to comment on Lauren's presentation, maybe give a little bit of their own personal take on what's going on in the Mississippi River Basin and in watersheds kind of writ large. Our panelists today are going to be Greg Searle. Greg has worked for the DNR for 27 years, and he's currently in the Water Resources Field Operations Director for the DNR. He works with water resources supervisors and staff throughout the state to implement water resources program, including the monitoring and assessment of lakes and rivers, water quality standards, total maximum daily loads, aquatic plant management and aquatic invasive species, and the surface water grant program. So Greg works with field staff all around the state. Jim Fischer is also going to be joining us. Jim is another DNR employee. He leads the DNR's Mississippi River team out of La Crosse. He's worked for 29 years on the upper Mississippi River, so he's seen a lot of change. He was first a graduate researcher on the river, and then within the DNR, he worked as a water quality specialist, planner, and team leader. He is on the board of the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association and the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association's Water Quality Executive Committee, Water Quality Task Force, and the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Coordinating Committee. He's also an alumnus of UW La Crosse River Studies Center, as well as Extension's Wisconsin Rural Leadership Program. And he brings a master's degree in aquatic biology from La Crosse to his work. So Jim and Greg are going to help discuss Lauren's presentation. And during that time, you'll have the chance to type in or compose the questions that you would like to ask Lauren and the panel, but also to review those questions and to upvote those that you would love to see answered. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Lauren Salvato to the audience today. Lauren is the Water Quality Program and Policy Director for the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association. She's a graduate of Indiana University's School of Public and Environmental Affairs Joint Environmental Science and Public Policy Program. She recently served as the National Coordinator for the North American Lake Management Society's Secchi Dip-In program while in graduate school. And in her role with the Secchi Dip-In, she got introduced to the Lakes Partnership and actually came up to Stevens Point for one of our past conferences. Lauren has moved quickly up the chain, if you will, up the leadership chain, and now she's going to be presenting an overview of what the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association is about, what their programs do, and how you might be able to get involved. So please join me in giving a warm Wisconsin Lakes and Rivers Convention greeting to Lauren Salvato.
Yay! We need sound effects, Eric. Everyone's clapping, Lauren.
Just getting all set up here, so just give me one moment. How's my sound, though, before I get started?
Sounds good to me.
Good. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to present and discuss the Upper Mississippi River Basin. I appreciate the opening resilience video to set the stage for this discussion. And a few other thank yous to Representative Ron Kine for his continued support of the Mississippi River, and to UW Stevens Point Extension, as well as the UW-Madison Division of Extension for moving this conference online. I'm sure that's no easy task, and with the short time frame that they were given notice to move it all online. So thank you there. So I will take you through challenges in the Upper Mississippi River Basin, but the ways that we are building resilience into the system. And I'm going to use basin and system sort of interchangeably, so just keep that in mind as we move forward. And I hope to do that by talking about UMRBA, who we are and what we do, our role on the river, case studies and practice, and end with opportunities for collaboration and a panel discussion. So the Upper Mississippi River Basin spans 5 states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. The Upper Miss flows approximately 1,300 miles from the headwaters of Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota to the confluence with the Ohio River at the southern tip of Illinois. The navigable portions of the Upper Miss are approximately 850 miles of river, starting from the Twin Cities metro area to that same Ohio River confluence. 29 locks and dams on the Upper Miss and 8 lock and dams on the Illinois River were built to create a stairway for which barge traffic and other river uses can move. The river is dredged to maintain a 9-foot navigation channel. And barge is an incredibly efficient way to move goods and materials. The capacity of a barge is 15 times that of a rail car and 60 times that of a truck. And so some of the numbers you're seeing on the screen here, 1,600 miles between the Illinois River and the Upper Miss, and between the two, 1,100 of those miles are navigable. The river is economically important. The sectors such as manufacturing and energy production that are 1 or 2 counties along the Upper Miss and Illinois waterway corridors generate more than $548 billion and support over 1.86 million jobs. For tourism and recreation, $54.6 billion is generated along the Upper Miss and Illinois waterway corridors and supports over 686,000 jobs. The Upper Miss is a prized ecosystem too. There are 3 national wildlife refuges covering over 285,000 acres, and our states manage another 140,000 acres. The river itself supports more than 127 species of fish and 30 species of freshwater mussels. Nearly 300 species of birds migrate through the river valley in spring and fall. The Mississippi Flyway is used by more than 40% of the migratory waterfowl traversing the US. And so in our practice, we manage the river for multiple uses. And this was further supported by a congressional declaration in 1986 that the Upper Mississippi River System is a nationally significant ecosystem and a nationally significant commercial navigation system. UMRBA was formed in 1981 by the governors of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri to facilitate dialogue and cooperative action regarding water and related land resource issues. UMRBA was previously a federal state compact called the Upper Mississippi River Basin Commission from 1977 to 1981, but was abolished during the Reagan administration. UMRBA opened its doors the next day as a 501c3. So that being said, we do not have land management or regulatory functions. Our board members span from departments of agriculture, departments of natural resources, environmental regulatory agencies, economic development authorities, and departments of transportation, which represent that wide range of river-related interests. So we identify and voice our state's collective interests. We augment their capacity on those river-related issues, and we foster relationships with federal agencies and other stakeholders. Our issue areas span ecosystem health, commercial navigation, clean water, hazardous spills, aquatic nutrient species, and flooding. So as in my title, I primarily focus in our clean water issue area, convening the Water Quality Executive Committee, our policy-making body, which Jim and Greg are a part of, and the Water Quality Task Force, our technical body, which Jim is also a part of. So within that focus area, they're organized into tiers. So tier 1 includes nutrient reduction strategies and interstate water quality monitoring. Tier 2 includes HABs, emerging contaminants such as PFAS, and chloride. And I'll describe those tier 1 issues in a few subsequent slides. So I'd like to switch gears next and discuss the challenges in the basin and why building resilience is critical. Both urban and agricultural non-point source pollution have contributed to high levels of nutrients in suspended sediments. In the figure on the right, you can see those red areas that are urban and developed, and then the yellow and other colors that are representing agricultural production. There's a higher volume of water in the basin as well. In the graph, mean daily discharge by decade is presented at Lock and Dam 3. On the y-axis is discharge in cubic feet per second, and months are represented on the x-axis. So 1960s in the light blue is perhaps the best example of what the ecosystem adapted to. Not quite as high, but that spring pulse, lower water levels in the summer, and then slight increases in the fall and winter timeframe. As we move forward in the decades, we can see that that spring pulse is slightly reduced, but it's sustained into the summer. And then we have a little bit of a lower period, but that fall and winter is even higher than it was historically. And so that green there is the 2010s, which does encompass 2019. And we know that 2019 was a catastrophic year for flooding. Communities were upended, farmers were unable to harvest, and some even lay seed, and the navigation channel was closed for 130 days. Continuing with examples of why we need to build resilience, Missouri experienced severe drought in the northwest part of the state. Some communities were days away from running out of water, and very quickly that drought changed into flash flood. So I want to move into those case studies next. The first is a new vision for the Upper Miss floodplain. UMRBA and the Army Corps are engaging communities, river-reliant industries, and other organizations within the floodplain community to create a commonly held vision with goals, objectives, and an implementation strategy for ensuring that the Upper Miss and Illinois rivers are thriving in resilience. In the past, our states have had conflict with the Corps over reoccurring requests to issue emergency dredge permits. Flooding and drought have occurred and continue to pose threats, as I previously mentioned. So to develop this vision, UMRBA hosted 6 sessions along the river during summer 2019. These events followed the open space concept in which people brought ideas and hosted a session. We listened and learned to that discussion. This figure on the left here shows some of the folks that were at the meeting, writing down those ideas. We fit them on into different rooms and different time frames. And so again, they led that discussion. Whoever participated kind of really formed the conversation. And so the overarching intention to do this open space concept was to strategically communicate in a different way. We understand that this work is going to impact communities and river-reliant industries, so we have worked with and engaged with those affected interests. They are a part of the decision-making and solutions, and so this end product, this piece of work that we develop is accepted and not fiercely opposed. From these sessions, we compiled high-leverage action items with regional consent. The actions will be further refined and included in this Keys to the River 2020 report. And some of the actions can be acted upon now, while some require a funding source. Examples of those actions include, so for flooding, that's developing a hydrologic engineering centered river analysis system, or HECRAF model, to help evaluate flooding under the same conditions and assumptions. We have secured 75% of the funding to do this model update, moving it from 1D to 2D, but we still need funding from the Illinois River. And some of the controversy behind this is that, for example, a city would hire an engineering firm that would use their own assumptions, and then similarly, a levy district would do that with a different engineering firm. So instead of this apples to oranges, which we currently have, we're trying to have apples to apples, and we can kind of compare and have the same conversation with the same fruit. So for drought, inventorying critical infrastructure on the floodplain that would be negatively affected by drought. So for example, this is a water intake for a public water supplier. For sediment and channel management, developing marketing opportunities to use dredge material in beneficial ways. And so that involves engaging the public and private sectors to overcome that capacity of dredge material placement sites. Another example of resilience is the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program, a comprehensive program for ecosystem scientific research and monitoring. It is a multiple partnership effort, including the 5 states and federal agencies, as well as nonprofits like UMRBA. The 2 elements of the program are long-term resource monitoring and habitat restoration and enhancement projects, so LTRM and HREPs. And UMRR was enacted in the 1986 Water Resources Development Act to better understand the ecology of the river, its resource issues, to monitor changes, and propose new ways to better manage resources. And the UMRR program actually received permanent authorization in the 90s. So for the LTRM portion, that's the monitoring for the river, and USGS manages this portion, and the 5 states implement the monitoring. So in the figure on the right is the red, and the red is where those long-term monitoring sites are. And this is the same area where the field stations are housed. So for example, Wisconsin DNR has a field station in La Crosse in Pool 8. And so the LTRM design also includes randomized sampling to cover a greater longitude and latitude of the river. HREPs are restoration projects implemented to fight ecosystem stressors and degrading influences. So in this photo on the right, there are wing dikes jutting out to the right of the barge. And so those structures help redirect the river's energy and provide a variety of effects. And since the program's inception, 106,000 acres have been improved through 56 projects. Another HREP example is building islands and building them where they historically existed. The benefits are to again redirect the river's energy and create slow-moving areas for fish and wildlife habitat. And so pictured here are just phases of island construction in Pool 8 near La Crosse, Wisconsin. And here's an aerial view of Pool 8. This is considered a really, I guess, a gold standard pool in terms of water quality and aquatic vegetation habitat. So you're not seeing necessarily island that was constructed in the previous slide, but just taking a moment to see this pool and how dynamic these habitats are that really help support a resilient system. The health of our floodplain forests is of great concern to resource managers. The 1993 flood killed and stressed tree species from prolonged high water, which cut off roots from photosynthesis. So when these die-offs occur, invasive species like reed canary grass take over. And so an example of this UMRR program in action is, one, we design HREPs to restore floodplain forests, and we mobilize, secondly, to collect and do research following the 1993 flood. And an output of that is this table on the right-hand side here. So we are hoping to do a similar effort to understand the effects of the 2019 flood. And so high water is not going to go away. So we need to figure out tools to build resilience, and water level management, WLM, or this video refers to them as drawdowns, is one of those tools. So this was created by Audubon, Minnesota, and I'll just go ahead and play this to explain drawdowns.
Oh, hey, Lauren. We need you to stop sharing and then optimize for the video because we can't hear it.
Got it. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Let me start that over.
The Mississippi River is part of the third largest watershed in the world. It's also the backbone of a flyway, which supports more than half of North America's birds. In addition, the upper corridor of this mighty river also supports more than 1 million jobs and generates $345 billion annually. Barges and cargo ships are an integral part of this economy, and they need the deeper waters created by the locks and dams. However, these artificial water levels create unnatural river conditions that have caused us to lose important habitat all along the river. By using a water management approach called a drawdown, we can restore habitat and help wildlife flourish, while also maintaining the economic benefits of the river. By periodically lowering water levels during a drawdown, we can mimic the Mississippi River's natural cycle. We can still have a robust river economy and waters full of life. We don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
We know that drawdowns will improve aquatic plant growth, and we know the aquatic plants that will collect sediment and help clear up the water. So if we do drawdowns, we're going to get plant response, and we're going to have clearer water and better water quality as a result.
Drawdowns have been successfully implemented on several areas of the river and have helped to improve thousands of acres along the river. Mike Kennedy owns land along the Mississippi River, and he has seen the benefits of drawdowns firsthand.
Just getting back to this. Sorry about that. Did not go as smoothly as I thought. That is not what I wanted to do. Okay, so this figure also just describes what you just saw in the video. So water levels are dropped. These soils are exposed. Seeds germinate and grow. And then emergent vegetation stabilizes soils, reduces sediment resuspension, filters water, and provides habitat for fish and wildlife. So we've been doing water level management for 25 years, and efforts were initiated following the late 80s when managers saw widespread vegetation reduction from prolonged drought. So this example in pictures was also what you saw in the video, is in Pool 5 near Milton, Wisconsin. In just 7 weeks, the vegetation growth results from the drawdown were quite significant. And we do find that successive years of drawdowns are even more beneficial to build that resilience. But it's not that rosy. We have not been able to implement water level management uniformly across the basin. Some of those reasons are because it costs money, and the majority of that cost is to dredge before the water level management event. Dredge material placement sites are also a concern, and so we have to manage for that as well. Core authority and policy has recently shifted. They have become reluctant to issue deviations to do water level management because of a recent federal court case ruling. And stakeholder outreach and impacts to river users and industries is a reality. One example is in Pool 19, where there's a hydropower dam that makes more money when flows are higher. Outside of that example, a marina may be very vocal about losing access to docks because of the customers they serve. And some of this can be overcome by outreach and to sort of bear with this short-term sacrifice for a longer-term ecological gain. But we need more resources to help fight the degrading influences of water and sediment in the basin, and UMRBA is working to authorize the Upper Mississippi River Water Quality Improvement Act, a federal-state collaborative to improve and sustain water in the Upper Mississippi River Basin and propel the investment in the reduction of sediment and nutrient runoff, as well as other pollutants. So the components of this act include sediment and nutrient runoff reduction, a monitoring network, modeling and research, communication strategy, and then a Mississippi River National Program Office. So I'll elaborate on a couple of those in the following slides. So we propose to bring additional federal funding to our 5 states to implement conservation practices in agricultural and urban landscapes to address non-point source pollution. Each state has a nutrient reduction strategy that guides where BMPs are implemented. And the development of nutrient reduction strategies was an action item of the Hypoxia Task Force so that states could have strategies to address nitrogen and phosphorus contributions to the Gulf of Mexico. The states work with stakeholders within the state to develop these strategies, and so we expect that additional funding for voluntary conservation practices will be well received and to help our states meet their nutrient reduction goals. If you are unfamiliar with the Hypoxia Task Force, it is a group that was founded in 1997 to address the eutrophication of the Gulf of Mexico, and the coordinating committee comprises of states from the Mississippi River Basin, federal agencies, regional groups like UMRBA, and tribal members. There are also some university partners sort of in that outer line group as well. For the monitoring piece of the act, we propose to fund the Upper Mississippi River Interstate Recommended Water Quality Monitoring Plan. The plan represents a shared monitoring design for the 5 states to sample and fulfill the 4 designated uses of the river: aquatic life, recreation, fish consumption, and drinking water. And since I did just spend some time talking about LTRM, I just want to note that these are different types of programs in terms of the monitoring design and then the parameters that are being monitored. So we have piloted the use of this plan in the northern and the southern stretches of the Upper Miss. So in 2016 and 2017, we did a pilot in Reaches 0, so the Twin Cities up to Reach 3 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and that was a joint effort between Minnesota and Wisconsin state agencies. We are currently piloting in Reaches Clean Water Act Reaches 8 to 9 with Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois state agencies. So as we are piloting it, these plans, this has required our states to take this on in addition to their routine job responsibilities. And there's a lot of coordination involved when you're working across multiple agencies to organize field sampling and collection, data analysis, and reporting. We are proposing to scale up real-time sensors in the watershed and strategically place them in the outlets of major tributaries in the Upper Mississippi River. So pictured here is an example of a sensor network ran out of the University of Iowa. And that zoomed in photo is a sensor that is placed on the Iowa River near the outlet to the Upper Mississippi River in the southeast corner of the state. So finally, the big piece of this act is the Mississippi River National Program Office. This would formally create a federal-state partnership and better leverage resources and direct them to urban and agricultural conservation practices. The office would be jointly administered by US EPA and USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. NRCS is known for their leadership in developing those relationships with farmers, the promotion of soil health, and agricultural conservation practices. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has been a leader of the Hypoxia Task Force and administers grants through program offices and other water quality programs. So to close, I'd like to offer ways to engage and collaborate with the Upper Mississippi River Basin. We'd appreciate your support of the Water Quality Improvement Act by contacting your congressperson, getting involved in your local watershed. Anything that you can do to mitigate sediment and nutrients on the landscape will benefit the main stem of the Upper Miss. And participate in UMRBA or UMRR's quarterly meetings. Feel free to contact me if you're interested in getting on the email distribution list for those meetings. And then for any other questions or comments that are not addressed in this panel discussion, feel free to reach out to me as well. And then thank you for your attention. That's all I have today.
All right. Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction and overview of a very large scale, multifaceted set of programs. Again, what we wanted to do too with this is just show that there are people operating at a very big functional scale. Many of our local lakes and river groups are focused, probably rightly so, on a very small scale. They're looking at their particular lake or maybe their particular stretch of a stream. So it is refreshing to see somebody operating at this really huge scale. To allow you, the audience, some time to compose questions, I wanted to invite my panelists to come in and give some response to Lauren's talk and sort of interact with Lauren as well, as we think about ways that this kind of applies both to Wisconsin, but also probably to other local state level programs. So again, I'm joined with fellow panelists here. I have Jim Fischer and Greg Searle from the Wisconsin DNR, who I introduced earlier. So I'm gonna see if Jim has his mic up and working.
I do. Good morning.
Good morning, Jim. And then Greg is in as well. He's got to unmute himself.
Good morning, everybody.
Sounds good, Greg. So Jim, maybe you want to go first. You're part of these efforts, and maybe you can just reflect on how, from the DNR's perspective, the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association has augmented and assisted some of the state's programs around river management.
Yeah, well, first, Eric, thanks. I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to connect with you today, especially now when there are probably a lot of other priorities in people's lives. But I appreciate the opportunities to chat with folks that have a similar passion for water resources. My interest in the Mississippi River actually goes back to when I was a little kid looking out the car windows riding across the Interstate 90 bridge. I was always fascinated by the Mississippi River, and I've been incredibly fortunate to work on it for some time now. So again, thanks for the opportunity to connect with you today. And then just picking up on Eric, earlier you commented on the Wisconsin River discharge, so it prompted me to see where the Mississippi River is at today. And at La Crosse, it's at about 125,000 CFS today. So give you an idea, we just at La Crosse gone up over flood stage recently. So not major flooding, but so far relatively normal. Also wanted to pick up, Eric, on your note about scale, because I think that that's something really important for folks to think about. The issues that we deal with on the Mississippi River really are the same things that all of the folks associated with the Lakes and Rivers Convention are dealing with. It's just a matter of scale. So nutrient, sediment, and habitat loss is important, not just on the Mississippi River, but in the local watershed areas. And, you know, for us on the Mississippi River to achieve the vision that we have for ecological health, we need to see the water bodies in the watersheds be successful as well. So improved water quality up in the watersheds is a precursor to improved water quality in the Mississippi River. So in terms of your question, Eric, as far as, you know, what the association has done for helping to improve things on the Mississippi River, you know, I came here in 1990 and started my work as a grad student. And at that time, there was broad concern that the river was on a very bad spiral downward. There was concern that the Mississippi River was going to end up in the same condition as the Illinois River, which had gone through a major ecological degradation. There was widespread habitat loss, island erosion, loss of backwater depth. There was aquatic vegetation collapse, and we had high suspended solids and low water clarity. So I came to the river at a time when things were looking pretty dire, and folks were kind of concerned about what the trajectory we were on. The other thing, I guess, is that the UMRR program that Lauren mentioned was still young at that time. It was implemented in 1986, so the people that were working with that program were just starting to figure out how do we go about restoring a habitat on a large floodplain river. And secondly, to the LTRM component of it, you know, how do we set up a large scale statistically valid monitoring program? How do we understand the dynamics of a large floodplain river? So in those early years, there was a lot of experimentation with restoration techniques and some modifications to the monitoring approaches. So we were going from a place where we had you know, little knowledge about large floodplain river function to now where our knowledge about river function is increased exponentially. And the Basin Association has been instrumental in that. The association is actually named by Congress as the caretaker of the master plan. So Lauren mentioned that you know, we were preceded, in the Basin Association were preceded by the Basin Commission. The Commission developed a master plan for the Mississippi River, and the association is now caretaker of that plan. And in that plan, it refers to and authorizes the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program, consisting of HREP and LTRM. So the association's been, you know, incredibly helpful bringing the 5 states together with the backing of the 5 state governors to help improve our knowledge of the river, as well as our the ecological health of the river. So that would be one element where the association has helped out. And then secondly, where I've seen a lot of change over the years is that early on the states had each state had individual approaches to monitoring and assessing the Mississippi River along their border. So if you imagine inland, say on the Wisconsin River, if each county had a different approach to monitoring and assessing the Wisconsin River, you might come up with some different interpretations. And we had the same thing on the Mississippi River, where each state took different approaches to monitoring and assessing it. And there wasn't a lot of data sharing. There wasn't a lot of exchange among the states. But through the Basin Association, through the Water Quality Task Force and the Executive Committee over the last couple of decades, we've improved on that considerably. Lauren talked about the recommended monitoring strategies. So we developed that through the 5 states and the Basin Association. We have developed recommended assessment procedures, and we've agreed as 5 states to assess 13 segments of the river uniformly. In the past, we weren't even comparing the same river segments. So the association has been tremendously helpful in terms of moving the UMRR program forward, our knowledge of the river and our habitat restoration efforts, as well as helping to improve the collaboration and coordination of monitoring and assessment under the Clean Water Act.
All right, thank you, Jim. We also have Greg on the line with us. And Greg, as I mentioned earlier, works with a lot of frontline sort of field staff as well. And Greg has also had, I think, a long history of thinking about our river basins and the Mississippi River Basin. Greg, do you have some comments or questions for Lauren as well?
I do have some comments, Eric, and I kind of wanted to let people know how we kind of, we've been talking about the Mississippi River. A lot of the people on this online version of the convention are focused inland, and I just wanted to talk about the connections of that a little bit. So first off, I'd just like to say thanks to UW Extension and the Lakes Partnership for the online Lakes and Rivers Convention. Thanks for the large number of participants. Quick story for you guys with the Mississippi River for me. My dad worked for the military, and I had a chance to live next to the river twice when I was a youngster in Savannah, and then went over to West Germany and then back to Rock Island Arsenal. But one of my fondest memories as a youngster was being able on summer days, waking up in the morning, packing our lunch, and our moms would say, "Be home for dinner." And we'd go down and play by the river. We'd be in the park and we'd be gone all day. Just something that doesn't happen anymore. So as far as the water resource staff that we work with inland, we have a lot of you work with your local lakes and streams biologists. You work with our folks in central office. We have a number of FTEs in the program, including project positions. We are heavily dependent on our limited term employees, and a lot of them help run the program as if they were in a FTE type position. And those of you out on the landscape know that. Our program is a diverse water program that provides support to other DNR programs. And I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the, we heard from some of the presenters here earlier, the keynotes from Todd and Doug Beard, Ron Kind, and even Lauren about, how do things really work? And the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership has been doing this for a long time. Citizen involvement from the ground up, common sense policies, partnering, understanding each other, and getting involved in your local watershed. And one of the things that I wanted to briefly talk about was, as far as water resource impacts, the non-point source, and how do we how do we affect change there, and how do we work with producers? And there are some unbelievable success stories around Wisconsin where producers and lake groups and counties and DATCAP and DNR and NRCS and all other kinds of groups are working together. You guys are very familiar with the Petenwell and Castle Rock storage. I know that Rick Georgeson has presented to this group before, and some of the things that they've done to try to pull people together, pontoons and politics. Another example that we have that's a little in the south part of the state, and there are examples all over the state, but it's the Dodge County Farmers for Healthy Soil and Water. And another really good example of people that live on lakes and rivers connecting with producers, and each side understanding what the other side, how the other side operates, what they're all about, and doing it in a collaborative way. So I just want to end and say, what is DNR's role when we think about our people that are out on the ground, our lakes biologists, our streams biologists, our folks working in central office? What is our role? Well, we're not the implementers. We can certainly support implementation, but we're not the implementers. We need to support lakes and rivers groups. We need to work with you on grants. We need to do monitoring and demonstrations and write reports and give talks. We certainly should be working with counties, UW Extension, DATCAP, NRCS, working with organizations like Wisconsin Association of Lakes, River Alliance, Wisconsin Land and Water, supporting the development of 9 key element plans. With our surface water grants program, we have a great opportunity for planning and implementation of projects to improve watershed, to improve water quality. We have started our healthy watershed effort, where we are going beyond. We are adding to the Healthy Lakes and Rivers action. And we are looking at how do we define healthy watersheds more broadly. So another thing that's going on. And one thing that we've really started doing here lately is working with people, with folks like Jim and the Mississippi, to figure out what's the best way to integrate with them. Our local staff are doing that. They're doing it on almost a continual basis. And we are trying to take those success stories and have others know of them, and then build upon that. So we're doing things in a more structured way when we do that. So I will just end by saying, people that are inland, why should you care about the Mississippi River? We've all heard this for many years, that lakes and rivers are a reflection of their watersheds, and it's the same for the Mississippi River or any water body that you may live on or care about. Healthy watersheds, as has been talked about this morning and yesterday, healthy watersheds are more resilient. And we're people that care about our water resources, and we are people that see beyond our own backyard, and we see more broadly about the care of our water resources. So with that, I will say thank you and stop, Eric.
All right, thank you very much, Greg. This has worked out well because we do have some questions that have been asked to Lauren, and so now we're going to ask her to check back in with her microphone. I'm going to read these off for you. The first question is coming from Molly McKay. And you showed the graph, Lauren, of the different changes in water levels over decades and the flow. And what we see here, the question is, are the sustained water levels following that spring pulse, is that resulting from human management decisions, like in the watershed, or is it just changes in precipitation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it's both, and would also caveat that with, we are not very good at teasing apart those things right now. So there certainly is more precipitation occurring and more water in the system. But with that, we've also increased the installation of tile drainage. So I would say it's both, and I don't know that we're confident to say what is sort of the more dominant contribution. So.
Sure, and I think I've seen on your webpage and other people's sites the discussion of tile drainage and the role that it plays. And we had a workshop on Wednesday talking about introducing agricultural concepts to non-agricultural communities. People may not even be familiar with exactly what tile drainage means, but I know that in the Minnesota River Basin, the Minnesota is a major tributary of the Mississippi. And there's a lot of intensive agriculture that happens in the Minnesota River, but what happens is a lot of that area, if it's wet or if there's wetter weather, the farmers have an incentive to put in, we call it drain tile, but it's basically piping in low spots of the farmland that then allows water that normally is sitting and soaking in the soil to instead move into the river itself. Have you seen anything, Lauren, about just how much tile has gone in the last couple of decades?
I guess not specifically. Our states do talk about like that the installation is increasing. So I guess I would just put that back onto Jim and Greg if they could speak to that. Just because I'm not at the regional level, I just know that there are more being installed, but not quite specifically how many.
Sure. Jim or Greg, any comments on how much tiling is going on in the whole basin?
Yeah, this is Jim. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I've heard quotes, of millions of miles of tiling that has gone in the last, few decades. I don't know how accurate that is, but I know it is a huge number of tile that has gone into certain areas, and particularly you pointed out the Minnesota River. I know that there's been a lot of tiling going in that watershed. I'm not sure that there's been as much going in Wisconsin. I don't know, Greg, if you have any thoughts on that.
The only thing that I know about is all anecdotal, and certainly have heard about, how things are going in Minnesota, and then it has greatly increased in Wisconsin. And in our discussions probably of about a year ago, that a lot of that seemed to be more focused on kind of the western half of the state. But certainly with the weather conditions we're seeing a lot more going in. And Eric, I don't know if there's a way to quantify that, but I think that's something that we could ask some folks that we work with and see if there is any way to quantify it.
Sure. And I think one of the challenges too, if you picture, and if you want to see what tile looks like on the landscape, it's usually those big black plastic tubes that are just being inserted into a trench that cuts out into the farm landscape. So maybe in your yard, you've put in some drain tile before to kind of help the water move around the landscape. Farmers do that on just a very large scale with this plastic tubing. And a challenge I think it creates too, in addition to accelerating some of the groundwater, basically is accelerating groundwater flow to the river. That groundwater might have made it to the river over time anyway, but by putting in the tubing, you make it move along a little faster. And groundwater can also then transport nitrogen from the fields and add that to the total load of nitrogen coming down the entire Mississippi. So it's definitely a critical issue to keep an eye on. Lauren, another question came up, and this goes back to the early part of your presentation. I think you and I might be young enough that we weren't really paying attention to politics at the time, but you mentioned that the predecessor to the UMRBA was abolished during the Reagan administration. Do you have any sense on that, or would you rather punt that one to our elder statesmen, Jim and Greg?
I can just, from my understanding, we were abolished because we were one of the newer of the federal state compacts. So there are still a lot of other ones that are in existence, but I think it was just a matter of federal spending at the time and cutting the newer of the collaboratives. So for example, the Susquehanna River Basin, the Delaware River Basin Commission, those ones are all in existence, but they were formed in like the mid-50s. So I think it was just kind of, I guess a matter of just our age at the time when we were formed. But Jim, if you have anything to add, go for it.
No, I don't know a lot about the specifics of the politics at that time. But I appreciate being referred to as an elder statesman. I think that's the first time I've heard that. I wasn't around at that time, so I'm not sure though. But I think what's important about that is that, even though the commission was abolished, the five states knew that what the commission brought to Mississippi River water resources was very important. So they said, even though this commission is abolished, let's figure out how to continue to work together in a collaborative fashion among the states to keep the upper Mississippi River elevated at a national level. And it's been very successful.
Yeah, and I think, I know a little bit about history, so I can comment on this a little bit too. And that this will have application for us, I think, in the next couple of years. Most people on the call here who do remember the early 1980s, probably remember that there was a significant economic recession at the time. So what are the consequences of a recession? Well, one of them is that generally tax revenue starts to decline. So federal and state tax systems start to feel the pinch. I imagine we're going to see some of that on the horizon here. Whenever those declines happen, kind of what Lauren said, the last programs on the boat are sometimes the first programs then that get pushed off the boat. And believe it or not, the Lakes and Rivers Partnership saw this happen. It was under, I think, a Democratic governor in the early 1980s that budget cuts were on the table for the state of Wisconsin. And one of the consequences of budget cuts was actually closing out the Lakes and Rivers program. It had only recently started in the 1970s. There were several DNR staff that were funded under the Lakes and Rivers program, and there was a grant program. And the budget cuts just said, well, this thing, it's new, it doesn't seem to be effective, let's just cut it. And the consequence of that, at that point in the early 80s, we'd actually started having these statewide meetings of lake stakeholders, and those people were not happy. They didn't like to see their brand new program that was going to help them tackle lake challenges go away like that. And so they actually rallied political support through their nonprofit organization and through individuals. They connected up with some very well-known lawmakers now, including a person who would eventually become the governor, Tommy Thompson, and tried to advocate for a more sustainable program, something that could be a little bit insulated from the ups and downs. And it was really out of that we got the water resources program that we have today. Those people advocated for a funding source that was tied into the motorboat fuel tax in Wisconsin, and that insulated them a bit from the dramatic up and downs that you might see in the state budget. And so I think at the federal level, there's also discussions around this where there's different sources of federal revenue. Clearly, one of the biggest ones is the income tax, and that's going to face consequences in coming months and years. But there's other sources of revenue that are not necessarily tied into the income tax, and we have to be looking at ways, I think, to find durable funding for the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association. And I'm sure people smarter than me that Lauren works with, or maybe Lauren's going to be one of these people who sit down and say, okay, how do we make sure that this is a sustainable project through economically challenging times? I got another question here from Ralph. Ralph says that aquatic invasive species are a huge challenge in the Upper Mississippi River Basin. He wants to know, how is the UMRBA balancing the ecological and economic value of the system with regards to aquatic invasive species protection and control?
Great question. Yes, it is a huge challenge in our basin. And I guess I would just start off by saying that our states don't totally agree on the control measures. And for example, like fish passage, or another one, the Brandon Road Lock and Dam, it is controversial in that it is a very costly electric deterrent for the state of Illinois to cost share. But a lot of folks are very vocal about this because they realize that that's the gateway to Lake Michigan, and that could be really detrimental to the ecosystem. So the way in which we've addressed aquatic invasives is through the UMRR program and those habitat restoration projects, because we find that when we make sure that our ecosystem is dynamic and resilient, that has the best survival for our native species. For example, common carp are well established in the system, but we have actually found that, I would say, in the last 10 years, that common carp are actually declining. We don't totally know why, but we have found that to be the case. So I hope that helps, and I would appreciate Jim speaking to that and sort of the history with some of our states' disagreement, but yeah, mainly because we are looking at some funding from the Navigation Ecosystem and Sustainability Program, we are sort of revisiting those conversations on fish passage and just to see where we land, and if that's an ecosystem project that we do want to support. So Jim, yeah, if you have anything to add, I'd welcome that.
Well, I think, Lauren, you summed it up really well, actually. That is one of the challenges, you know, of working 5 states together, is that we have different management approaches within each state. We have political swings and interests change over time. And, you know, getting all the planets to line up at the same time it can be a challenge. We've made, obviously, as you know, you laid out, Lauren, some good progress on a number of fronts. AIS, we continue to try to make progress on that, but it is a big challenge. But one of them, again, as Lauren pointed out, that we agree on is that you know, if you have a healthy habitat, you have healthy ecosystem. And this kind of gets to resiliency. You know, if you have diversity and redundancy, and you've got healthy conditions that support healthy native communities, that will help to keep the invasives at bay to a certain degree. And we've seen that. I mean, it's largely anecdotal, and it's, I guess, you know, some scientists working on the river think that the reason that we haven't had a further northward expansion of Asian carp beyond where they're at now is because we do have a pretty healthy ecosystem in the upper reaches of the river. So unfortunately, well, this may not have been noticed in the news with all of the COVID crisis going on now, but unfortunately, a few weeks ago, there were 50 Asian carp that were caught by commercial fishermen in Pool 8 right near La Crosse. So that's a bigger number than we've seen in some time. We've seen occasional adults here and there, but no reproduction that we've been able to document or see. So this was a little bit alarming to see that we do have those Asian carp here in that number. You know, of course, it remains to be seen. I'd be speculating if I say that that's going to expand. I don't know. I really don't. Our hope is, again, that having a healthy native community will help keep them at bay. But one of the challenges, again, that we've been dealing with is, as Lauren pointed out, the flows in the river have been at sustained levels for a long time. I mean, they've been higher than normal levels for a long time. And what happens on the river is when we have high flows, the Corps of Engineers lifts the dam gates out. So there's a point where we move into an operation called open river. And so the dams don't really hold back a lot of water. They maintain it at a certain elevation to keep enough water in the main channel for barges to move through. But when the flows come up as high as they are, the Corps lifts those gates out of the water, and it becomes essentially an open river condition. What happens then in those open river conditions is it makes it that much easier for species such as Asian carp to move through those dam gates. So that's a little bit more than the question, but yeah, I think to the point, we continue to focus on it. We continue to have that dialogue among the states on, you know, how do we best address invasives in the upper Miss, and we try to move forward where we have agreement on that.
There's a couple of questions related to drawdown, so I want to poke those in. One of them actually plays off of the invasives discussion, and it's about when you're doing these drawdowns in order to establish some vegetation, what has to happen proactively to make sure that that's not just a big invasive plant bed, but instead is something that you desire? And then how do you monitor the status of invasive in those reestablished vegetation areas?
Yeah, so Army Corps of Engineers district, so St. Louis district is one of the districts that is able to do those drawdowns routinely. They were not able to do them in 2019 because of high water, and it looks like we'll talk about that in another question. As far as making sure those are native species, I guess I haven't heard them having issues with invasive species taking over. And they have been able to monitor that for 4 years. Each year, this was from 2015 to 2018, I believe. And so we actually just used somewhat the LTRM, long-term resource monitoring protocols, but also they measured, he basically put like a square area down and then worked with a researcher out of the University of Tennessee to measure the food resource within it and convert that to like duck energy days. And so that was some of the monitoring that occurred during that time frame. And I believe now the Army Corps District, St. Louis District, is also working to better understand how this impacts fish populations in terms of young of year fish, and if that supports those guilds moving forward. So Jim, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that? But yeah, I haven't heard too much that invasives are dominating when we do these drawdowns.
No, yeah, you're correct, Lauren. Actually, I think that's a good question. I guess you know, there hasn't been anything specific done to ensure that it isn't taken over by invasives, which is kind of surprising as I think about it. I guess I've never really considered that in the past, but no, when the drawdowns have been done, we've had pretty good response with native emergent vegetation. There is some use of purple loosestrife beetles on the river to help keep loosestrife down. So that may have had some effect on it. I don't know for certain. The other thing I guess I'd say is, you know, the area where the drawdown has the greatest impact is, you know, really right in that, in those shallow water areas along the terrestrial riparian zone there. And those are, like I say, there's a lot of perennial emergent vegetation, arrowheads and others that respond to those. So I don't know if it's just that the vigor of those particular species are outcompeting others. I don't know. I think it's really an excellent question.
There was also this was on a Fish and Wildlife Refuge within our basin. They lowered a lake level and they found that native species quickly left and went to water depths that were greater. And these carp did not understand that that was happening. So they were able to do a really, a large kill off of carp as a result. And that was just a matter of the evolution of our native species that understood to leave the area. So I would say that was one success story I could share for drawdowns.
Lauren, some other technical questions about drawdowns. Number one, just sort of how, in a practical sense, how is it done? And it seems like it would just be about opening the gates to allow for a lower water level. But is that becoming increasingly impossible to do with these high water levels? And then also, how does that impact downstream recipients of that water, and how do they feel about the drawdown practices in the upper reaches?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I'm going to do my best to not get too technical with it because one, I'm not an engineer, and two, you know, let's stay broad with it. But I guess what I would say is that on the broad scale, lock and dams are different. They operate at different control points. They're primary, secondary, tertiary. I would just encourage you to research that. But what it just means is that they all are a little bit different. And they have sort of a line in which they operate on an operating band. And that keeps the navigation channel in that 9 foot. So at each of these dams would have a discharge threshold in which it exceeds, then that gates are open. And so that is a point in time in which you cannot do water level management. Conversely, if water levels are too low, water level management is not feasible. So there is a drawdown that's within the operating band, and there's a drawdown that's outside of the operating band. And if it's outside of the operating band, it does impact that 9 foot navigation channel. And in both scenarios, within the operating band and outside of, you do need environmental impact statements You just have significantly more when you're now impeding on navigation.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess keep in mind that like the authorization, the primary purpose is for navigation. So they are not authorized to do flood control, right? So that would impact users if they were kind of they were keeping the gates down at really high water levels. So I hope that helps give you a little bit of an idea. And I do encourage Jim to add if he has anything there as well.
Yeah, I think you also have a lot of resources on your webpage to explain to people sort of what the navigation challenges are and how these drawdowns are set up. The video that you shared was just one part of a larger video, I think, that also got into some more detail. So we are going to link the video that you shared on our archive as well, so that people can kind of watch that on their own time. Speaking of time, we are kind of a little bit over our time today, but that's fine. Our next sessions, I believe, start at 10:45. I want to just extend my greatest gratitude to Lauren and Jim and Greg for joining us today. We really did appreciate you carving time out of your schedule, and I do understand, kind of like what Jim had mentioned, these are challenging times for a lot of people, and for me and my crew, I think it's been helpful to have this event as a distraction. I hope it has served as a good distraction for you, Lauren, and Jim and Greg as well. Please join me in giving a Convention Lakes thank you to our guest, our plenary speaker, Lauren Salvato, and Jim and Greg.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Appreciate it.
People are typing in the chat their thank you and clapping their hands. That's kind of the best we can do. And I do want to give a couple of segue comments here. So the next session, the round of breakout sessions will start at 10:45. You'll have to go back to the main agenda to find the links to the Zoom you want to join into. You're welcome to do that. We will be compiling this video and posting it on the archive. We encourage you to try to be as social as you can with us, even though we're all in different places. Check out the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership Facebook page. This is a place where people are posting maybe backyard pictures, or post a picture of your lunch. Share with us just in a comment what you're liking about the convention. I'd also encourage you to check out on the agenda page that you're going to go to. We already have an evaluation tool up there, a feedback survey for you to fill out. You can come back to that at the end of the day if you want to and fill that out. But thank you all for joining us. This has been tremendous, and I'll see you next over in the concurrent sessions. Thank you.